housing crisis is wreaking havoc nationally. Our podcast discusses how it is playing out specifically in Black Berkeley, California, chronicling the lived experiences behind what people call gentrification, detailing our endeavor for our right to stay and our right to return. Brought to you by Healthy Black Families. I am your host, Deb, and this is Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. Welcome. All right, everyone. I am here today with Ayanna Davis, known in our community as Mama Ayanna, who is the Deputy Executive Director at Healthy Black Fam. And she's been on at least one of these podcasts. And then we have Jassmin Poyaoan, who's former Program Director of Community Economic Justice Clinic at East Bay Community Law Center. And last but definitely not least, we have Anna Cash, working for the City of Berkeley as the Community Development Project Coordinator, and ushering in what we are here to talk about, which is a Berkeley housing preference policy. Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Good afternoon. Hi. Doing well.
Hi, Deb.
Hi, we're here to talk about this preference policy. And let's start with me asking you, what were each of you working on before coming together around housing? Ayanna, I'll begin with you.
Oh, at that time, we were in the middle of COVID, the beginning of COVID, actually. Beginning, middle. Anyway, we were working on supporting our community during an extreme pandemic crisis, making sure that people stayed housed, had food, protective equipment, access to testing, and continuing our programming, education, advocacy. Our motherhood circles are telling our stories, therapeutic writing circles, and our sugar sweetened beverage, health equity, education, and advocacy was some of the work we were doing. And of course, working with community partners and stakeholders, including around housing and affordable housing and the changes that were happening to the Adeline corridor community. Beginning to do work around the Ashby BART station development.
Anna, what work were you doing around right before everybody came together to do this push?
Yeah. Before we all came together to work on the housing preference policy, I was working at the Urban Displacement Project, which is a research and action center at UC Berkeley. So Urban Displacement Project created maps to demonstrate gentrification and the displacement of low-income people of color happening in the Bay Area, and also conducts policy-applicable research on displacement. And many communities, including here in Berkeley, have used those maps in anti-displacement advocacy efforts. So I learned a lot while working there about the dynamics of displacement across the Bay Area and beyond. And I met a lot of great community partners around the region. And part of how Urban Displacement Project works is to ground truth its maps, to collaborate with community partners on research. So I was working in a community partnership model before coming to this specific work. And then I came to the City of Berkeley through a Partnership for the Bay's Future Challenge Grant Fellowship, which was designed to develop anti-displacement policy and to really do so in a community-driven model. That approach and the opportunity to work right here in Berkeley drew me to the Challenge Grant Fellowship. And that fellowship was 2020 to 2022. And then I came on as city staff after that to continue working on these important issues, especially the preference policy.
Jassmin, if you can tell me what it was that you were doing prior to.
Yeah. Well, I was working at the East Bay Community Law Center, where I had helped start our Community Economic Justice Clinic in 2015. And prior to me coming onto the team, EBCLC, in terms of their economic development work, had solely been supporting local small businesses and worker-owned cooperatives, which really drew me to the organization since that was what I wanted to do post-law school. I wanted to be an attorney that supported folks who wanted to create their own livelihoods, wanted to create services and businesses that served community, and also wanted to be in the Bay Area where I was born and raised. And so I was just finding my way in the City of Berkeley, figuring out, applying what we call the community lawyering model, really understanding community needs and being directed by what community members were telling us to focus on. And so I remember my first year, we did a small business survey to see whether or not we should expand or just continue doing the work that we were supporting businesses with. And this was primarily in South Berkeley, where EBCLC is located, and where we really decided that we wanted to focus on due to the rapid changing and the demographics changing, the displacement happening, especially experienced by the Black community. And overwhelmingly, small business owners were telling me and my team that, hey, continue, like, this is great. We love the support, but we also need support actually being able to stay in the community and to live here. Because how can we even do business here if we're getting pushed out and can't even afford rents? And so prior to our kind of all coming together and working on these policies, we were already moving toward a framework where, in addition to supporting small businesses, we also wanted to support community groups and coalitions that were fighting for more access to affordable housing, for low-income housing, housing that was accessible and not just affordable, because affordable, in quotes, is just out of reach for a lot of our clients. And so I got very close to a lot of community members, did my work getting to know the history of South Berkeley and of Berkeley in general. And one thing led to another. Like I said, our community lawyering model kind of led us to be guided to supporting the Adeline Corridor specific plan process and making sure that we were able to represent the voices at city council meetings, or toward developers who unfortunately, don't get uplifted because they don't have lawyers, or they don't speak the language that's spoken in some of these meetings. And so we did that work, and we had this opportunity to apply for funding, the Partnership for the Bay's Future, which Anna had mentioned. And we were already doing the work anyway. And, East Bay Community Law Center, nonprofit, so we had to figure out how are we going to get this funding. So we kind of, we built with the connections that we had and entered into this partnership. And the rest is history.
Thank you for that, Jassmin. I really didn't know the entry point of East Bay Community Law Center. So I love that you had a survey that went out, very grassroots. And I love that you actually listened to the people. So if we could kind of pan out and talk about housing From each of your viewpoints, what would you say were the conditions in the city of Berkeley, in the region also known as the Greater Bay Area, and then panning out even further from that in the land known as the United States? So I'm asking two things. One is just your perspective on housing in general, and also your personal around it, right? Anna, if you could start us off.
Yeah. So Berkeley as a city, has changed a lot demographically in the recent years. The Anti-Eviction Mapping Project and Berkeley Rent Board did a study that showed between 2005 and 2019, the percentage of households earning at least $200,000 a year increased by 124%, while the percentage of households earning less than $75,000 a year decreased by 23%. And that study also tells us that between that time period, the median gross rent paid in Berkeley increased by over 50%. So conditions like this really contribute to the risk of displacement and create very significant challenges in the community. And displacement is a racial equity issue, as we know. And the clarity of how that shows up in Berkeley really motivated me to do this work. So Berkeley's Black population decreased by almost 50% between 1990 and 2018, which is, more proportionally than San Francisco or Oakland. And between 2000 to 2018, all other racial groups' household populations grew slightly during this stark decrease in the Black population. In terms of the conditions and history in Berkeley, there have been a lot of, really powerful reports written. One resource I want to point folks to is Othering and Belonging Institute's Roots, Race, and Place report, which is really informative historical research. And it demonstrates that while Berkeley may have a progressive reputation around the country, there are also other parts of the city's history, for example, being the birthplace of exclusionary zoning, that really laid the groundwork for an inequitable housing landscape. At this point, the city of Berkeley has long been a leader in anti-displacement policies, for example, with one of the strongest rent stabilization ordinances in the country, which has been in place now for several decades. At the same time, with rising costs, a lot of displacement has already taken place. So I wanted to be a part of the ongoing efforts to innovate and find ways to support community in staying or returning to Berkeley. And I'm really driven by just helping make the city a more equitable place where everyone can thrive and feel belonging.
Thank you, Anna. Jassmin, if you could talk about conditions in Berkeley, what personally pushed you in the direction of this work?
I was born in Hayward, grew up in Union City, moved to Berkeley in college, and lived there for almost 2 decades. So, but I mean, I really appreciate this question because I remember actually, all the memories are flooding in right now. This is long ago, but it was when one of the first conversations, just one-on-one conversations I had with Mama Ayanna when we were first organizing kind of this community leaders group, which we'll maybe talk about as we talk about how this policy was formed. And, I just remember being asked kind of like, why are you here? Why are you doing this work? And I just felt like it was such a uplifting and motivating conversation because we were able to really connect the issues and what we were seeing at the time, just to our own personal histories, and whether that be in the past or even in the present. And so just remember being able to share that in my own, and just feeling like this is really personal for me. And without going too much into detail, I like I said, I grew up in Union City, Hayward area. I did experience homelessness when I was pretty young. So I was in like middle school going into high school. I went through a lot of different experiences, right? Like with my dad, we were couch surfing at families' homes. We stayed at hotels when my dad could afford it. And, it was only for 6 months, comparative to what a lot of people living outside have to go through. But I think it introduced me to kind of this way of thinking that this could happen to anybody, and it's not this thing that's just separate from me or that other people go through. I have nothing to do with it, kind of thing. And especially having that happen to me as a child, or having experienced that as a child, it really informed, I think, my worldview as an adult. And so when I was figuring out what I wanted to do for work and then just kind of with my life, and coming out of law school and knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer for the people. I didn't just want to be a lawyer to make money, but I wanted to do something that was important to me, that was personal to me, and also still having family that were experiencing housing insecurity, and very close family members who were experiencing homelessness in San Francisco and in the Tenderloin. And so even though I had, quote unquote, done the American dream thing to do, or what the American dream tells you to do, go to law school, do this and that, it still was a big part of my life issues like homelessness and housing insecurity are still a big part of my life, because it's systemic, and it's in the community. It's not an individual thing. I could do everything, quote unquote, right, but I also have family members who are dealing with it. And having that mindset made it really easy for me to be living in Berkeley, work at East Bay Community Law Center, seeing what our clients were going through, meeting people in community, and just having empathy, and knowing that what they're going through is not separate from my experience, and meaning that I had to do something. I wasn't just going to sit there and watch. And so at the East Bay Community Law Center, we had a housing practice, or they still have a housing practice. And I just remember I started in 2015, and the number of attorneys in our housing practice tripled, literally tripled, maybe even more than tripled, within my first 5 years of work, or 3 to 5 years of working at East Bay Community Law Center. And the reason why the practice tripled was because the need for eviction defense, the need for unlawful rental increases, the need to really protect tenants was just increasing. And I wanted to do something that got at the system, right? I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, and not to knock eviction defense work. That's part of the puzzle, right? If we're going to address the housing crisis. But I knew that I wanted my role to be kind of addressing the systems that were leading our clients into our doors. And so that's how I got into really understanding housing development, land use practices, really understanding what I could do in order to negotiate with developers, or to imagine different policies to make it easier for the laws to protect tenants, and also to create housing that is accessible not just to people who are low income, right, but also people who are very low income or extremely low income, or are living outside and need a transition into permanent housing. And so that's just kind of a little bit about my personal story, and why I think I address and why all of the stats and everything that Anna laid out, why it really spoke to me and kind of just pulled me in to say, hey, I need to do something, and I need to use whatever privileges I have as a lawyer, as an attorney at EBCLC to work on it. And I didn't know how, but with the initially, but with working alongside community and different stakeholders, I could look back on my days at EBCLC and be very proud of the work that we were able to do together.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for several things, right? One, that you chose to respond to your human experiences, right? And stay human and not just exit, which a lot of people do. And also for the vulnerability of sharing your story with us, which is key, right? And before telling our stories at Healthy Black Families pivoted to a podcast format, and I was anchoring the writing circles. The last writing circle we did during COVID was on displacement. And it's so interesting how many filters all of us have up to say, oh no, I've never really experienced homelessness, right? When in reality, so many of us have, we just don't call it that, right? Because we've been, and I'm going to put it in quotes, lucky enough to have had some kind of safety net that was there to keep us off of the actual streets. But actually, so many Bay Area folks have experienced some level. There's very few people in my circle that have not had to couch surf amongst friends, family for months, sometimes years, stretches of time, while we're navigating this crazy market of being able to find a space where we can call our own. So yeah, thank you so much, Jassmin. Mama Ayanna, tell us about, what you have seen in the Bay Area and the personal that brought you into this work. And maybe even talk also about HBF, right? Because HBF was also pulled into this work in the same way East Bay Community Law Center was.
Yes, so I am the elder here at this podcast table. And so I began to notice a level of gentrification as a teenager in South and West Berkeley, led by often people who came here from Mendocino and other counties with cannabis money and were cannabis sellers and distributors, and were able to bring cash and their racial privilege to purchasing homes in South Berkeley. I also began to notice a change in the City of Berkeley used to send out a population report. And so I noticed a change in the population demographics. Really began to notice a marked one in the 1980s, 1990s, and knew there was a really big problem by 2000, and started trying to bring it to people's attention. As we look at displacement, right, it doesn't happen in some type of vacuum, right? It is aided and has been aided by the capitalism, privilege, racism, institutionalized racism. When talking to and trying to work with community members to support them in getting housing, finding gatekeepers and roadblocks to even people that were teachers and nurses and educators, right? And what we found is that often people weren't given loans or were in that so-called what they're calling the middle, right? As well as when people were losing their homes, there's a lot of financial education that didn't happen to homeowners in the Black community. So people weren't learning how to put their homes in trust and to do financial protection of their property. And so there was a lot of people losing property to probate and families not knowing how to navigate probate. And I remember Sister McKinney began to educate people about that in the 80s to try to stop what was already happening with families losing their homes. And then the predatory lenders, a lot of these loans would have balloon payments and things like that. So that was well before the Great Recession and the housing so-called bubble burst. And then you have what I consider transient populations that came with tech over and over again. You had almost 3 waves of tech booming in the Bay Area where people would come and go, come and go. And while they're coming, they have cash that they can spend on housing. And then, also seeing corporate buyout of housing. You have organizations like Sotheby's, right, that flip houses and turn them into luxury houses, investing, a couple $10,000 and then reselling for $200, $300, even $400 more. So that is some of what happened with displacement, people being pushed out, priced out, and the consistent redlining and predatory lending or institutionalized non-lending that happens with Black people throughout the country. And now my understanding is happening throughout the world. When you look at that, right, and you look at, well, how did these things happen? These things happen through laws and policies, and then official and unofficial agreement. Over the years, when you live in a city like Berkeley that's highly segregated, right, and has highly segmented populations, then there's also that unofficial agreement of when you sell your house, right? You can't legally put those racial discriminatory clauses in anymore, but you can make decisions on who buys your home and who your real estate agency is and who your agent is and the type of fees and the type of loans that you give. Then there is also the level of disinvestment. You'll also see this pattern in the Bay Area, and it happens in Berkeley, especially South Berkeley, where there is a disinvestment, financial disinvestment in a neighborhood or a community, a saturation and influx of drugs, and a criminalization of drug use, right? And then real estate speculation that happens. I saw all of this going on around in Southwest Berkeley. I also saw when BART came through and displaced large neighborhoods at South Berkeley or Ashby BART station along the Adeline Corridor community. There were 12 blocks of families. And when you look at that, it's a big, blank space now. Well, now we have, a few buildings were able to stay. But if you look at the quality of the housing along that area and the apartment buildings, you'll know that that was what we could possibly call a thriving Black community at that time. There were doctors and lawyers and real estate agents, hairdressers and dentists and cleaners. And there were all kinds of businesses. A lot of the homes had the ground floor businesses and the families upstairs. People were able to find places to stay and affordable places to stay, because that was a cultural norm in our community. And so often you could leave home, get a job, and get a place to stay. But as the shift happened, as the gentrification, the disinvestment, the speculation, and then the eminent domain housing displacement happened, then a whole working class community in North Berkeley and a Black working class community in South Berkeley was displaced. That has a big impact on the economics of a community, right? So by the time you get to 2020 and the beginnings of the Berkeley Considers survey, that was created specifically to see what community support there was for creating housing and a housing preference policy that would allow African American Black people to return to Berkeley. Just in that, where you come to this point where you have tens of thousands of displaced Black people, higher rates in 2020. 73% of the homeless in Berkeley were Black. And we know there's higher rates of poverty, higher rates of preventable diseases. During COVID, Black people died 50% more than any other race in Berkeley. These conditions don't exist in a vacuum. So as a community, we have to come together, form strategic unity and alliances to not only fight and resist, but change and shift these conditions and the culture that creates the conditions of displacement, being unhoused, housing insecure, poverty, institutional racism, etc. Healthy Black families, our role in that what is looking at health equity and the social determinants of health as not separate, right? Housing and where you live is not separate from your access to food, healthcare, quality education, transportation, jobs. What the infrastructure looks like, all of those things are interconnected through the social determinants of health. This is how we live. And if you have a population where it is evident that these social determinants of health across the board are not being addressed in the same way that they are addressed in other areas of the city's population. And like Anna said, that during the time that displacement of Black African American people was happening in Berkeley, other populations, their demographics were rising and their incomes were rising and their ability to afford the housing. And capitalism and greed, when we began the work around the affordable housing preference policy, it was a request from the Black community leaders group that the city had formed. They asked us to do that work. And looking at the survey, the Berkeley Considers survey, we looked at it and were like, this is not adequate to address the needs of our community. And that's part of what happens when you don't have people who look like you or have your experiences create policies and laws or even surveys. So Healthy Black Families started the Right to Stay, Right to Return, Right to Own survey, where we began to document not just did the community want affordable housing? Hell yes, right? But also what was happening in our community and the impact of displacement. And as we used that survey to educate our community at the same time, it was a source of education and organizing. And interconnected to all the rest of our work, because we are a whole people. We are a whole community. We are not separate and disconnected from the conditions that we live in and the impacts of the policies and those in power, and the impacts of colonization, greed, and corruption that capitalism creates.
Thank you for that, Ayanna. I will say we all know that everything you just said, the steps have happened in, I would say, any major urban area in the United States, right? That displacement is so not unique to Berkeley. Every place, and it's a national epidemic. I'm aware that it's an international epidemic. It's been happening in major urban centers across the globe, and how capitalism tends to really break us down. And one of the things, as you were talking about the importance of housing as an entry level to all social determinants of health, mental health, right? To be able to close the door in a place where you can call yours is so key for my mental health, right? And to any humans, really, to be able to decompress and be able to make your food and rest before you go back out there, right, is key. So let's pivot.
Can I add something there?
Sure.
Because I was in a conversation just the other night with Friends of Adeline and the director, soon to leave, of Health, Housing and Human Services, Lisa Vahus, and one of the for the City of Berkeley. One of the things that we talked about is the fact there's research that has been done that shows that housing impacts the mental health. If you are housed, you are more likely to have less mental health problems. Not saying that the conditions we're living under now haven't impacted everybody and created a behavioral health and mental health crisis throughout the country, if not the world. But those of us that are housed are less likely to develop those responses. In particular, if the rest of our social needs are taken care of. So if we're fed, housed, clothed, right, have community, are not isolated, and are cared for, then we're going to have much better health outcomes, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and materially.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Written, edited, and hosted by Deborah Hailu. Telling Our Stories program coordinator at Healthy Black Families, Inc. Audio engineered by Adrian Davis and Salim Naji Ullah of One Hitter Entertainment. Shout out to James Shields of Creative Shields for our beautiful podcast artwork. Akila Shahid, Office and Media Manager at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for the many ways she steps up and bridges our gaps. And Wilhelmina Wilson, Executive Director at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for bringing all of this together. Casting out the net of Black love in service of all humanity. This has been Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. See you next time.